This button sometimes will work and sometimes it doesn't. It's just getting old. It's actually a relatively old phone. So what we're going to do is replace the control cable for the volume, power button, and the camera. And while we're at it, since this phone is a couple years old, we're going to go ahead and replace the battery also. Now, if you have this problem with your Windows Nokia phone, you can always use a double tap to turn it on. I should say usually. If you double tap the screen, it'll turn it on. But in order to lock the screen, it's going to be a little trickier because you just have to pretty much wait for it to time out. So hopefully I can get this thing to shut down, which is the first step. And there you see it's a little tricky to get this thing to engage properly. All right, now it doesn't want to shut off. There is a sweet spot here somewhere. And it doesn't seem to be working at that. There we go. So if I hold it right there, we can power it off. Even though we're going to be replacing the components attached to these cables, I do want to point out their location because it's easy to slice through them if you're not careful when you pry the rear panel off. So probably the easiest way to get into this is starting at the top right-hand corner on the back. And we may be able to get in here with the pry tool if we're careful. You should be able to get right under this area and then just kind of slide it around. And it will unsnap. I'd recommend you go counterclockwise across the top and just keep working your way along. You'll hear it coming apart. And just in case you couldn't see it, once I get this opened up, there is a gap where I started prying right here. So when you first get inside, there's a spot where you can get in here to get it started. And then just work your way around the edges and you'll disengage all of these clips, remove the back panel. And I took out the SIM card, even though we don't really need to do that. Now on the inside, we need to have access to this cable over here, which connects underneath this panel. However, in order to get this into position, it looks like we're going to have to pull the logic board. And of course, we're going to take out the battery. So let's open this up. And it looks like this comes with some adhesive already. And you can see exactly where the battery plugs in. So now that we have the power turned off, we want to disconnect the battery. That'll be this flex cable right up here at the top. So just very carefully pry underneath and we should disconnect like that. Now we have no chance of power flowing through the phone while we work on it. And the next thing we want to address are these 3 Torx screws. And from here we should be able to remove the retaining plate. Feels like we've got a clip down here on the bottom. So I'll push this down. There was a small amount of adhesive right here, so I had to kind of pull on that to bring it away. And now we're going to go ahead and disconnect the other cables because we will be removing the battery. So I'll come in right here and just carefully lift. And then of course we have our control cable here. In fact, this one you could probably get with your fingernail just as easily. And we'll disconnect that. Now, in order to remove the logic board, we are going to have to go ahead and disconnect the LCD cable. Camera, I believe, would be advisable. And then it looks like these two screws at the top and maybe this cable should be disconnected also. These are going to be smaller though. And you'll see that when you remove this screw from the top right hand corner, there's a component that's part of the antenna system that will come out with it. And we do want to disconnect this antenna cable. And from here, if you can get underneath the board, you should be able to carefully maneuver it out from inside all of these flex cables. Be careful that you don't get hung up on anything. And there you go, there's the logic board. And you can see the camera that I disconnected from over here did not need to come off after all. So we can leave that plugged in. And now we'll go ahead and remove the battery. Let's see what kind of resistance we get. And it looks like it is going to be glued inside. So a fine point spudger like this probably be our best option for getting underneath the battery, because this is going to be a very small area we have to work with to get underneath it here. But once we get started, and you can feel the adhesive starting to give away. I'm going to need something a little stronger. Eventually I switched from the plastic tool over to a screwdriver. Now do be careful when you pry underneath the battery with any hard metallic objects. It's very easy to puncture and you want to avoid that if possible. We are going to be replacing this battery, but we still don't want to make a mess of it. Also, as I was working with the screwdriver, I used a number of different tools to just kind of maneuver around and get it pried out. You don't want to bend those metal pieces that go around the battery compartment, but if you do, you can also bend them back into place afterwards, as long as they're not completely broken. That adhesive is no joke. Down here we're going to have another T4. And if we remove this, there is a bar that goes down the side here. Let's get some tweezers. If we lift this out, you can see that is attached to the volume and power control cable. So it looks like our new one came with that same bar attached, so we can take this whole thing off. And just replace it with this one. All right, so this is going to go right here. And that should hold everything in place. And we can also see that we need to have the tension from the battery pushing up against this so that the button will click properly. So I'm going to have to adjust this and bend it back that way. From here, we can go ahead and install the new battery. Do make sure that all of your cables are out of the way, and that's going to be the most challenging thing from this point on, is just making sure that you move all of your flex cables and your antenna wire out from underneath the logic board when you put it back in. Here you can see I'm kind of testing the buttons, making sure that they work, and as I pointed out earlier, if any of those black dots are missing from the cable, you will not have functionality of that button. So in this case, my camera button ended up not working. I had to contact the supplier that I bought the cable from in order to get a replacement and get to go through this whole process again. Now, I did find that putting the front-facing camera in first made this a little easier, and you've got all these cables and the antenna wire and everything to work around. Make sure you move those out of the way. It's kind of tricky, but again, I had thought that maybe leaving the front-facing camera would have been the best option, but at this point, I think it's a lot easier just to go ahead and detach it after all. And once you do that, the tricky part, of course, is getting all these cables out of the way. So if you need to take something like a piece of Scotch tape or maybe painter's tape, you can kind of move these cables over and then tape them down into position. It helps if you have an extra hand, but if not, just make sure that you're not burying anything underneath the logic board, because if you do and you tighten it down, you can actually damage those cables. And from here, we can go ahead and start plugging everything in. And of course, the last thing that we attach will be the battery. And don't forget to put this retaining panel back into place. And then we have our 3 screws that need to be replaced. You'll want to start replacing the panel by tucking the bottom end in first. And from there, it's a little tricky to explain, but you just kind of have to feel your way around. This thing does not always sit down as easily as it may look, so you just kind of have to work with it. Don't force it. There are a lot of clips that need to go into position, but as long as you start it at the bottom, you should be able to get everything to clip into place. When you finish, you should have a nice smooth edge all the way around. If you found the video helpful, like it, share it, check out my channel for more tutorials and product reviews, and most of all, remember to hit the subscribe button. Feel free to leave your feedback in the comments section, and thanks for watching.